All right, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all. Don't be shy, those in the room. Please fill in these front tables or else it feels like we really are in an undergraduate lecture where everyone's gone up to the back first. Of course, I haven't been in an undergraduate lecture since the last century, but that's just because I'm old. Look, let's get started. My name is Luke Sheehy and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Universities Australia, and it's my great privilege to be joined by Ashlyn Horton, who will introduce herself now, but of course to co-host this afternoon's symposium, and a very warm welcome to those of you joining us here at the University of New South Wales, Sydney, and of course, many of you joining us online. But over to you, co-host.
Thank you, Luke. Hi, everyone. My name's Ashlyn. I'm the current president of the National Union of Students, and I'm also a student at the ANU studying a double degree in international relations and math. We would like this to be as collaborative as possible, so we do have a lot of Slido opportunities and Q&As. So to test our QR code, we do have a couple questions which should be coming up there. So we've got, which of the following issues do you think matters most to students? And in your view, what should the primary role of be of universities in supporting students? So I'll give you a bit of time to have a look at those.
Good. Well, today we've got nearly 400 people participating in this really important symposium. Many of you are passionate about what we do at universities because you're here today on a beautiful sunny Sydney afternoon, where if I was an undergraduate, or a graduate for that matter, I would be out in the sunshine somewhere, or at least in a beer garden. So I attribute to those who have come to talk about students' role in governance and universities. Governance is really important, and of course there'll be a conversation later this week by education ministers around university governance. We can always do better to serve the 1.5 million students that choose Australian universities for their world-class education, the hundreds of thousands of staff we employ, and the community that we serve, not only just in Australia, but right across the world. We're so privileged in Australia to have students from 140 countries call Australian universities their place to study, and of course, nearly 1 million Australian students at the same time. Your voice is really important. I'm delighted to be able to help facilitate that today. I'm an old voice now, in my mid-40s, but certainly have benefited from university and the role that I had in being a student voice and a student advocate, now as a chief evangelist for the university sector. So today we're really looking forward to a robust, respectful, but important and timely conversation. We want to hear from you, the students, and we want to hear from people passionate about getting our universities right. But importantly, we want to recognise where we are today. And so at this point, I'd like to welcome Dr. Peter McKenzie, who will welcome us to country. Thank you very much, Peter.
Okay, we'll give me the chair. Thank you very much. I must apologise, first of all, for my rather casual dress, but I had to rush to get here. In the rush, I left my notes, I left my glasses, and this is a winged job, fair dinkum. Well, yes, I am Dr. Peter McKenzie, and I'm an elder and a person from the local Aboriginal community at La Perouse, which is geographically not very far from here. And we are situated on the shores of Botany Bay. Now, I'm here representing my community, the local Aboriginal Land Council, and basically those of my community who believe in this ceremony called Welcome to Country. It is a contemporary version of a traditional occasion, and it gives me great pleasure to represent my community in doing this. The Welcome to Country, as you may know, is that which we usually perform to welcome people, new friends such as you, who may wish to visit areas within our traditional lands, which in this case is here in the beautiful city of Randwick. And it is my great pleasure to do so. Well, we hope that you have a pleasant and a safe journey home today, and also that you have a lovely event here. And that's, I guess, the main thing that we needed to say to you. And thank you. I'm Dr. Peter Mackenzie, and you are in a beautiful campus here at the University of New South Wales. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Dr. Mackenzie. We were to be welcomed today with some remarks from the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Tiller-Brunks, who's come down with stomach bug, so he sends his apologies. But in his place, I'm very pleased to introduce Professor Sarah Madison, who is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Education and Student Experience at the University of New South Wales. This division includes future students, registrar and student services, and of course, education and student experiences. Sarah, like many of us, have worked in higher education for over 2.5 decades with 10 years of senior leadership experience, including the department chair, school dean, faculty executive dean, pro-vice-chancellor, and of course, more recently, deputy vice-chancellor. Past roles have also included the Women in Astronomy chapter of the Astronomical Society of Australia and the International Astronomical Union Working Group for Women in Astronomy. These are words I don't often say, so I feel like, you know, as a musician and recovering lawyer, I don't get to say astronomical very often. I should probably, when I used to do fees for people, they were astronomical. And of course, finally, but not the CSIRO Australia Telescope Time Assignment Committee. But nonetheless, thank you for being here on behalf of the University of New South Wales. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks very much for that, Luke, and thank you very much, Dr. Peter Mackenzie, for your warm welcome to country. I'd also like to acknowledge the Bidjigal people whose unceded lands we're on today. They're the traditional custodians of these lands, and I acknowledge that the Bidjigal people are also the custodians of knowledge on these lands, knowledge that's been shared and exchanged for countless generations. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are here with us today. A very warm welcome to everybody here to UNSW, whether you're in the room here in the Kensington campus or online via Teams. Welcome to the Universities Australia Student Governance Symposium. As Luke mentioned, our Vice-Chancellor, Tiller-Brunks, is ill and very disappointed that he can't be here today, so I'm going to read his speech for you. So welcome also to Luke, the CEO of Universities Australia, all of our keynote speakers and panellists. It's really great to have you here. And UNSW is very proud to collaborate with Universities Australia on this very special event. I think we can all agree that university governance has been getting quite a lot of airtime lately, and so it should. As a member of UNSW, you're probably sick of the VC saying over the last 4 years that our public universities really exist for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to serve public good, to ensure benefit not just for those who we educate or research and partner with, but for all of society. And it's only through good governance of our universities that they can reach their full potential as the engine rooms of Australia's national prosperity and keep making enormous contributions to society on a global scale. University education, university research, how we engage with local, national and global communities, we do all of these things with a positive impact as our driving force. But universities are also very complex organisations, and many of them are quite large. UNSW Community, for example, is almost the same size as Darwin. And like all complex organisations, universities need really robust governance structures. Good governance that helps make sure that we're true to our purpose and our mission, and good governance that helps make sure that we meet the reasonable expectations of the people that we serve, whether that's to do with the quality and integrity of our education and research, or the culture of our campuses, or operational matters, or the myriad of other issues that are important to our students, our staff, our partners, and the broader university community. So governance frameworks are very necessary and very normal part of university operations, and it's right that they should be subject to monitoring, to analysis, and yes, criticism when it's due. Our governance structures should be clear and transparent. They should be accountable and effective, and they should represent the people who actually make our university what they are. Because as we all know, universities are living, breathing organisations of people. That includes all of you lovely people in the room, all of you folks that are online, and the hundreds of thousands of students, in fact it's 1.6 million students, researchers, academics and professional colleagues all across Australia. And that brings us to today's Universities Australia Student Governance Symposium. Yes, the university governance should be clear, transparent, accountable, effective and representative. It should be all of these things. And it is often stated that our systems, policies, processes, documents seemingly are all of these things. But actually it's the how, the day-to-day reality of how it operates and the culture which supports and underpins governance that is vital. And given the diversity and the scale of our universities, and UNSW has 82,000 students, the how of involving students is really critical and an evolving question. As many of you will know, Australian universities have what we call a tripartite governance model. It's similar to, but a little bit different to the governance models we see in corporations. The legislation of each university is also a little bit different, but the three standard parts to university governance are the ultimate governing authority, which is the university's council or university senate, depending on what your uni calls them. Then there is the academic governance, that's the academic board, the faculty boards and the plethora of academic subcommittees that operate at universities. And thirdly, there's university leadership, and that's the day-to-day operational management that senior university leaders manage, such as heads of schools, directors, deans, associate deans, deputy vice-chancellors, pro-vice-chancellors, etc. In conjunction with this three-part governance model, our universities, all universities, have very active students as partners frameworks. These frameworks, as well as a whole host of local arrangements at universities all over the country, aim to ensure that student representation and student contribution to governance, be that council or academic, as well as university operations, are embedded across our university sector. And there's always more that we can do on this. At UNSW, students are of course vital partners as we strive to our vision for positive societal impact, what we call progress for all. And in fact, more than contributors, students are collaborators in shaping the future of our university and indeed of all universities. UNSW is really privileged to have strong student voice and fantastic partnership with ARC, which is our student life organisation, and with the 400 clubs, societies and sporting groups, and with the Student Representative Council, the Postgraduate Council and the various other student bodies that exist here at our university. The student representatives on our council and on our academic boards, our faculty boards, and we look to have much more engagement on our operational leadership as possible, such as things like our Level 1 Health and Safety Committee, our EDI Committee, various standing groups, special purpose groups, etc. But we're always looking for more ways to make these relationships and partnerships more strong and meaningful and explore new ways of engaging with the breadth of the student body. And that's really what today is all about. If I just speak for a moment on the operational side at UNSW, and I'm sure this is reflective of many other universities, we have a long history of in-class students as partners programs. These are the sorts of programs where student partners work in teams alongside the course or subject convener to facilitate two-way feedback between the student cohort and the teaching staff. They provide agile, real-time communication between teachers and students to make changes, clarify misconceptions and open dialogues with students about their learning experience. And I'm sure that's common across most universities today. Another great example of students as partners at UNSW, but in a governance context, is not just the inclusion of students on academic boards and its subcommittee, but this has been supplemented here by the Academic Board Student Reference Group, and they actually met today and we all had a great chat. And this was established by our current academic board president, who wanted to give students an opportunity to get together to discuss all things student governance in a student-led environment before every academic board meeting. And it's produced some really impactful outcomes. And it's important. An important example of this was the discovery by our students of gaps in our processes here at UNSW of how we provide academic support for students who are affected by domestic violence. And this led to immediate and lasting change. And we want to make sure that having real and meaningful impact on the direction and culture of our universities is part and parcel of the whole university experience. Now, getting genuine representation from 82,000 very, very busy students is clearly a challenging thing to do, which is why we need to all be creative and comprehensive as possible in providing opportunities for all students to engage in governance. We want to make sure that being genuinely involved in university decision-making through governance bodies is part of student belonging at universities, that we really create and nurture a vibrant, inclusive university community where everybody can enjoy and where everybody can fulfil their potential. So today is about progressing these discussions on how the student voice can be and is part of how we shape universities to make sure that they're inclusive and effective governance bodies. This symposium is a chance to talk about how we can share best practice, to highlight gaps and issues, to build culture of genuine partnership where the whole breadth of the student voice is not just heard and valued, but is a part of setting the direction of our universities. And importantly, realising that the manner of this engagement is ever evolving, just as the needs and expectations of our students is also ever evolving. I believe we've got about 400 people involved this afternoon, both in the room and online. We've got students, academics, professional staff, university leaders, and higher education experts. And it's a really wonderful spectrum of the experiences and perspectives across university governance. And the best part is that we're focused on the same thing, how to improve involvement of students in great university governance in a genuinely meaningful way. And this is going to be a fantastic afternoon, I'm sure. So I'd like to encourage all of you to be bold with your ideas and to really enjoy turning over new perspectives and fresh ideas as we work together to build great governance at our universities and the very best quality student experience that we can offer. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Madison. It's now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Professor Kelly Matthews. Kelly is a Professor of Higher Education and Academic Lead for Student Experience and Strategic Initiatives at the University of Queensland. She believes that higher education is at its best when students are active participants, shaping learning, partnering with staff and influencing decisions that matter. And as inaugural co-editor of the International Journal for Students as Partners, she creates global opportunities for students to shape knowledge. Her impact has been recognised with an Australian Learning and Teaching Fellowship and Principal Fellowship of the Higher Education Academy. Today, Professor Matthews will be speaking on the topic of upholding student voices for good governance, so please make her feel welcome.
My goodness. Hello, everyone. It's wonderful to be here. I'd like to begin by also acknowledging Peter McKenzie's Welcome to Country and to pay my respects to the Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander and First Nations people here with us today. I'm going to start by first an invitation. The QR code up there is for my LinkedIn. I would love to connect with anyone in the room or online so we can keep this conversation going. You will notice that this week I have been posting about student voice, students as partners, students engagement through my LinkedIn, and I will continue to do that so we can keep this conversation going. I'd also like to say, agreeing with Peter, this is a beautiful campus. You've all turned the weather on today. I've come from UQ though, and as someone emailed me and said, on brand, Kelly, with that picture of the jacaranda, the campus is beautiful in purple. Purple in that UQ is purple, but purple in the trees as well. So when I say student voice, in your head, just a thought exercise, it's the first thing that comes to your mind. How many people thought a survey? When I take that survey, it's meaningful. I feel seen and heard. When I get those survey results as an academic staff, I feel seen and heard. So there's something here in taking a moment to pause when we think about good governance, and it really is coming back to that idea that Sarah was talking about. Human relationships, meaningful and genuine, and how student voice can bring that to enrich our campus, but sometimes how student voice is used as a way to signal something that doesn't feel like a genuine or meaningful relationship. So when I think about student voice, for me, I think it's about students being in conversations that shape their education. Their education, yes, that word is on there twice, and I've just noticed that. Students, it positions students as knowers, as knowledge holders. It counts students amongst those who should be a part of making decisions, because education not only affects them, they know things. Students see a part of their educational experience that staff do not see. Luke mentioned a long time ago being in university the same way for me. What we know though within that is students come, and while I sit here and I look from policies and procedures, a student understands how their courses and classes fit together. They understand where there's contradictions. They understand where a policy or a process that I think is beautiful on paper is not actually working in practice. So when we think about student voice, we think about how students have knowledge that should contribute to the shaping of higher education. So it's that thinking about counting students amongst those people that should be at the decision-making table with us. And it's not to come to shared understanding, it's about sharing different understandings. It's about the different people at the table saying, I'm not sure I actually see it that way. Have you thought about it this way? We might not agree, but what's the process that we're going to engage in to think about these decisions together? And that's a really important point. One of my colleagues yesterday was talking about social cohesion. She said social cohesion is not agreeing. Social cohesion is disagreeing with grace. It is disagreeing well. So we know when we're in a meaningful students as partners, student voice, engagement between staff and students, where we're actually okay with different points of view. So let me just, to make it clear, all the things that I do not believe that student voice is. Student voice is not a survey, it is not a result, it is not a dashboard. If it's a metric, I'm going to say that's not student voice. All of those forms are important. I do research with surveys. They're important, but that's not what we're talking about when we talk about student voice. It's not treating students like a source of data. Student voice is not a one-way broadcast of information. It is not an email, it is not a lecture. Student voice is also not admiring, fawning, critiquing, or talking about students. None of those things in my mind are what we're talking about when we talk about student voice as an idea, as an aspiration, but also as a lived practice. So when I think about student voice, it is always about fostering a culture of participation and partnership within higher education. We hear all of these words: participation, student-centered. I love all the co-words: co-design, co-creation, co-inspire, co-discovery, engagement, partnership, representation. For me, you know when you're in good student voice situation where you're really taking that seriously. Staff and students are in dialogue, and what comes out of that process is a sense of trust and belonging. So, when I'm thinking about student voice, here's the way that you know. You are doing it with students. Students and staff are doing it together. It is not about doing something for or to students. And that to me is the simple litmus test that we can ask ourselves. Have we got genuine, meaningful student voice culture within our universities and higher education? And I hear this a lot, but every student can't be at the decision-making table, Kelly. This is a nice idea. It works really well in the United States and those private liberal arts universities, but not in the Australian system. And for a long time, I accepted that. This idea that student-staff interactions, student-staff relationships was just too hard to do. My university, we've got courses that are larger than my entire school that my children go to. First-year chemistry is larger than our high school down the road. These are really big classes. So what does that mean to say, well, how can students actually be involved in the decisions that affect them in higher education? When we think about a culture of student voice, and the way that I like to think about answering this question is, we can't think about student voice as one way. We cannot think of student voice as a student is at the table on every decision that's being made within the institution. We have to think about where our students are, and we've got to bring that ethos and we've got to bring that commitment to where they are. So for example, we're here talking largely about student governance today. That is fundamentally important, and I'm going to talk about elected versus selected student representatives soon. But it is fundamentally important that we have got students who are elected by their students, their student body, to speak on their behalf. That's one form of representation, but that form of representation can feel hollow if a student who's sitting in their classroom doesn't feel seen and heard. If they're in their class and they don't even understand why they're learning what they're learning, why they're being asked to do what they are being asked to do. So we think about student voice as student representatives in governance, speaking for students, really important leadership roles that they take on within the institutions. And a student in their classroom, not a student representative, but a student in their classroom should have that same opportunity to participate, to shape the learning that's happening in their classrooms, and to feel like they're part of a learning community that is contributing not just to their own learning, but actually the learning of their peers and the learnings beyond the university in industry. When we think also about services, and more our students are accessing our support services, our well-being services. And in an environment like that, it is crucial that every student feels seen and heard in that environment as well. What does it mean then to say, how do we co-create our student support services? How do we ensure they're meeting the needs of our students? We work with our students. We partner with them. We come into dialogue together and we say, what are the right problems that we should be addressing here? In addition, we've got so many opportunities now for our students in extracurricular activities. Sarah mentioned students as partners frameworks. Many universities now have adopted this model, and it has been highly successful. There's over 200 examples that have been published in the International Journal for Students as Partners, where students and staff get around a table together and they say, what's going on? What are the opportunities? What are the issues? How do you think together we can make this better, different? Let's decide together how it is working. So these types of models, again, they put students in a position of being knowledge holders, not only able to give feedback, but to say, let me implement and let's do this together. So if we think about student representation, I've got a QR code here. It's to a fantastic book if you haven't seen it. It is a handbook on student representation, politics, and government. It was written by a scholar, Marja Clement, from Harvard University. It's a fantastic review of the history of student government and representation across the globe. It's really good at explaining how representation systems in higher education also differ, why European representation looks a lot different to Australia, and why Australia looks a lot different to the United States. But what Manja talks about in this book is she talks about this idea that student representation has an advocacy role in lots of places. When we see that advocacy role, it ebbs and flows between a kind of agreeable advocacy, if you will, and a disruptive form of advocacy. We see a lot of activism in this space and the ebb and flow. a lot of student representations came out of actually the 1960s and 70s and student political movements, and that's what we're seeing carrying forward there too. However, we also see a lot of representation happening through agreement, formal agreement and informal agreement. For this particular scholar, she's written this theory of student agency, and it is how through representation, it fosters a notion of broader student agency and how that agency then moves to where the direction we're going in, which is student representatives don't just represent students and advocate them. They are trying to create the opportunities for students as representatives and broader student bodies to have more of an impact. And that impact is not just in shaping higher education. That is actually impact in the world and in communities. I want to double click on something here. Elected student representation is a leadership role. Often I do not hear people really acknowledge the type of leadership that is exercised among student representatives. So when we think about partnership, student representatives absolutely can be in partnership with staff. We want to see working together towards that shared goal. But really what they're doing is they're engaging in forms of shared leadership on behalf of the university community. And when we think about this, that representation can feel to the people involved that it is genuine or that it is token. I don't think we need a lot of scientific studies here. You talk to people. How many of you in the last week, you've been in a meeting or a class or a conversation where it was clear to you the other person has stopped listening to you? This is a common thing, like we know that. We know when we're trying to engage with someone and they have just tuned out. Everybody knows the kind of smiley face, nod, and agree, but you're actually not listening to me. So when we're thinking about this type of representation as a form of partnership, it is that dialogue, it is that willingness to say, I want to actually engage. There's a reason you've said that. I want to hear more about that. I'm not sure I see it the same way that you see it, but that's okay because I'm going to learn from what you're saying here, and I'm going to understand you. What we're seeing a lot of, though, is alongside elected student representation, there is a hunger, particularly in Australia, for students and staff who are not involved in elected forms of student government, or academics not informed, also involved in elected forms of academic representation. They want to engage and they want to connect. Particularly now with AI, this idea of saying, oh my gosh, I need human connection, that actually learning when it's at its best is a social process of engagement and interaction. And it is that sort of hunger for saying, how can I collaborate? That we've seen this movement towards this notion of all students can be partners. This idea of students as partners, and I'd say Alison Cook-Sater in the United States is absolutely inspiring, has been writing for over 30 years about this notion of student voice being translated into higher education as this idea of partnership. And the language of partnership has emerged out of student voice because it signals the quality of a relationship between humans. Alison's got strong views on how AI should fit into that relationship. Her focus there is on learners and teachers, connecting and collaborating. I'm going to give you the Lego analogy. It's another way to think about partnership. Staff come to the metaphorical table and they've got their Legos. There's some colors, there's some shapes, there's some sizes. What can we build together? Students walk over to their metaphorical table and they've got their Legos. They've got something different going on here and they're building it. This idea of partnership is if we combine our Legos, some of yours, some of ours, we can build something together that we could not have done otherwise. It is an interdependency, actually, in that connection. It's the first time I've tested the Lego metaphor, so I'll be really curious to hear some feedback later. So when we think about this idea of student voice, for someone like Alison Cook-Sater in the United States, for myself in Australia, we've seen that student voice has gotten watered down. It's lost its meaning in some ways. Every time I hear a university say, we've got the student voice, we've named our survey system, our evaluation system, student voice, a little part of my heart just dies. However, I get it. It's because they have this desire to say, I want to understand and I want to listen to students, just can't see another way to do it. And also, I don't want to give up control of the narrative. If we ask the students the questions and then we take that information and then we give it back, right? We don't actually have to engage in that hard work that takes time. Now, a lot of this is just we all feel really busy. Does anyone in here not feel busy? Anyone on Zoom? Just that spare time floating around? To do this type of partnership, to engage in student voice in these ways, it actually does take time because you've got to build relationships. But it doesn't just take time, it actually takes emotional energy because you've got to be curious about listening to other people who are not going to agree. If anyone's been to academic board, you've been to council, you've been in a political science classroom, you're not supposed to agree. Like, that's the joy of it, right? But it can get exhausting. So when we think about this notion of engaging in partnership, first started talking about in Australia where it really, really resonated. We did research with 11 students and staff from 11 universities in their partnership programs. They loved the values. They said, this is what I've been looking for. Education, we're always talking about what we learn, what I get, what's for me, what about my job? But actually, this is values-based work. It's about reciprocity. It's about connecting in a way that's give and take. And through that, I feel seen and heard, but also like I'm making a difference. So that values-based language of mutual respect. And then through partnership, when you're in a partnership, you're working towards something together. And what you do along the way is you say, well, here's your contribution, and here's my contribution, and here's what we're going to do together. And all of a sudden, that turns to shared accountability. And when you're in a healthy partnership, say, I thought we decided this. What's happened here? Do we need to change the plan? Great, let's have that conversation now too. But that's the accountability that comes from a genuine form of reciprocity. So when I think about student representation and student partnership, they are both fundamentally essential in the ecosystem of student voice, that ecosystem that creates that culture that I talked about. They both matter. However, they coexist, but they're not the same thing. And there is a danger if we confound them. I'm going to talk about some work that I've done with a fantastic colleague of mine, Professor Molly Dollinger, who's on Teams. Hello, Molly. One of the things we were grappling with was we were hearing a lot about engaging students as partners. There was a lot of excitement and energy around that. Again, especially with AI, it's coming back. We need to connect. We need that human connection. We need that student-staff interaction. And we were seeing a lot where people were saying, well, partnership can become representation. Those students in partnership, they represent the rest of the student body, right? There's a real danger and risk here. And here's the danger and the risk. In student partnership, a student comes to that interaction just like everyone else there as themselves, speaking for themselves, and that is enough. Their lived experience is enough. That's what they are contributing. When a student partner comes to a project and then the idea is, well, you actually represent all other students, that's not what students have signed up for. And that's also devaluing the lived experience that they've got that they just want to bring and contribute and connect through. They don't want to carry the weight of now I'm speaking for many other students. When we think about student representation, especially elected student representation, those students have stood up for that leadership role. They are trying to do a service for the whole student body, and they are signing up to that very challenging job of saying, I am here to actually represent the student population. It might be all students, it might be segments of students, but they've done that. And part of what their work is to go listen to students so that they can represent well, and they can bring that. And they are there to advocate and to engage with a different role and a different responsibility. So when Molly and I were really thinking about this, representation versus partnership, student representatives should feel like partners. They should have all of those values extended to them. Particularly in the UK, a lot of legislation now says our students will be partners, they'll be representatives. And that is a call for saying, let me at the table. Take me seriously when I am there. I am not going to solve all of your problems, but I'm going to be at the table so we can think and solve together. What happens with students as partners, we found in our analysis, is in some cases, student partners selected by staff were then put into student representative positions. If that's what the student has signed up for, and that's what that's about, let's be clear, the difference. I'm speaking for myself, I'm speaking for other students. However, it's a different tension when a student is selected by a staff to represent in a space where an elected student representative is now no longer there. That's a tension we identified. Molly and I had some really great debates and points of views on this, and it challenged both of us here. But in this particular piece of work, and I'm really glad to bring this to the conversation today, I do think we've got to be clear, especially this moment in time. I think I was at UNSW for about 20 minutes, and I talked about America 3 times. At this moment in time, that practice of democracy, of elected students representing and doing that work just feels really, really important right now. So this idea of engaging students as partners rests alongside student representation, but it's about recognizing the different roles that students play when they're in those different positions. So when we think about good governance, to me, is about fostering that culture of student voice. That is what we are all working towards. Fostering a culture where in a classroom, a student has a voice and they feel seen and heard. When they're at council, they have a voice and they feel seen and heard. It looks different, but it is still that same ethos and it is still those same values. This does take a different form of leadership though, and I really can't recommend enough this book from Professor Carrie Lee Krause, which talks about learning-centered leadership. And it's the type of leadership she's advocating for in higher education that says, as senior leaders, we have to have a learning mindset. We have to be curious, we have to be willing. We have to come to the table with that mindset, and we've got to have the skills of co-design and co-creation. And because I'm me, I'm going to close with a call to action. I also think we've got an opportunity here in Australia to really make clear what our principles and our understanding of student voice is moving forward, so that we do not, one, diminish its true meaning by conflating it with metrics, so that we continue to lean into the more challenging but ultimately community-building work of being at the table together or being in the classroom together and having those debates, of disagreeing well, of understanding the process that we're using to move forward together. I'm going to leave it there. I am going to welcome everyone to ask some questions. For colleagues on Teams, please ask some questions as well through the Slido. I'll be very curious to hear what you're taking away from that, what's resonated with you, or anything that's challenging you. Thank you very much. Ashlyn, come do your magic.
Hello, thank you so much for that. So we do have time for questions. We have a couple mics running around if there are any questions from the audience. Hi, Angus.
Hi, Ashlyn. I'm Angus. I'm the UCID SRC president. I think what was quite interesting was the distinction between elected versus selected representatives. At UCID, that's quite a large problem. The question is, in my opinion, there's no incentive for the university to actually acknowledge elected representatives over selected, simply because they can get everything they want out of selected. So what's the actual spark or change point that will push universities and their management to actually prefer elected reps instead?
Yeah, thanks. Look, when Molly and I started this analysis, this is not what we were expecting to find or to come to, but it was just so alarming. And it really did concern me, particularly as someone who has been a big pusher of partnership. It is not to push out this notion of the elected student rep. So what is the solution to that? I think part of the solution to that is, it's going to sound, it is actually raising the awareness, it is asking the question, and it is having the forums that says, we actually do need to address this. What's the incentive for universities? Call to action. I think that is part of that. Thank you.
Any others from the audience? Yes?
Not really.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
Cheers.
I really appreciated that, the discussion you're having with us. And I sit on council here at UNSW as a student representative. And I think one of the things I experience and some of the conversations I have with other representatives on different groups, and something we hear in the media all the time, is this tension between student welfare, academic welfare, and the interests of students and academics in the education system and politically, and the corporate realities of a university, the huge institutions that they are, and the financial risk management governance that is required to manage them. I wonder if you have any thoughts about what we as the student representatives can do and what the universities can do to be negotiating the tensions that arise between those two different realities of the university system.
Thank you. I was listening to a great podcast today with Brene Brown, and one of the things that she was talking about is that in this moment that we're in right now, she's speaking from the United States, was paradox. And that as humans, we just have to hold all of these tensions, and we've got to move away from this idea that it is this or it is that. And how do we hold that plurality and the tension and the paradox? And for her, I'll stretch this a little bit. She said, what's really worrying me with the leadership that I work with is that a few people have that capacity, and they're bringing that type of deep thinking. And a lot of other people aren't. And with AI, she's worried that that deep thinking is going to just diminish more and more our critical thinking skills. So my answer to that, for me, higher education, and I think what we have to remind ourselves of, is if we can't figure this out, then we're really in trouble. It is our duty to bring all of the diversity and the ways of seeing the world together in the tension of, are we a corporation? Are we a company? Are we a learning environment? What's risk management? All of these things to say, how do we find the way forward with those tensions and navigating them? I don't know what that looks like yet, but I really do have a tremendous amount of belief and trust in bringing people together in universities, students and staff, putting the ideas out there on the table and saying, what is the way forward here? How can we move forward? But everyone has to come with that genuine intent of saying, I'm open to thinking completely differently about what the university might look like 5 years from now. Thank you.
Awesome. I'll go to one of our Slido questions. This is, how can we embed a national approach to compensating student representatives for their time to ensure equality between staff and student decision-making power?
I was in London in June. I was at the 11th annual Students as Partners Roundtable that started in Australia. One of the things that really struck me, one, was how little they were talking about AI. I didn't realize how we've become consumed by that in higher education in Australia, and they've taken a different approach there. But the other one was how their student representation is so much different than ours in terms of particularly acknowledging the workload that it takes for elected student representatives and how they're not compensated in Australia, how they've got compensation, and they've got a lot more leeway about what happens with their course studies. So I do think that that is a really important question that we should think about moving forward. And as we grow in scope of a culture of student voice, again, to ensure that elected student representation is cemented there as an important part of being in higher education and a social democracy, I think these are exactly the types of questions that we should be asking and looking at so that student representation does not just get sucked up into the university's cult of busyness. We are all already so busy. We need to do this in a way that is healthy for ourselves, and we need to be modeling for students how to also be involved in the university in a way that is also healthy, recognized, and rewarded.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm looking at this big red clock on the stage, so I feel like Q&A time is over now. But thank you so much, Professor.
Welcome. Thank you, everyone.
I would now like to invite Professor Kylie Reedman to the stage, along with our next panellists, Will Burfoot, Richard Lee, Jennifer Lowe, and Chad Buckman. So this panel is about student voices in governance. Obviously, governments can mean a lot of different things to different people, from decision-making in a university council to leadership at other levels. What do students really want when it comes to having a say in the way their university is governed? Can this happen outside of the council room, and if so, how? And how do we ensure that diverse student voices are heard? So to explore this topic, we have Professor Kylie Reedman, and she will introduce our panellists soon. But first, I will introduce Kylie. So Professor Reedman is the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Education and Students at UTS. In that role, Kylie focuses on creating the institutional conditions for building staff and student capacity in learning, teaching, and the student experience, centred around academic engagement, belonging, wellbeing, and partnerships. Kylie ensures student equity is a central theme of her work, including several research projects that investigate the experience of students from a range of diverse backgrounds which are underrepresented in higher education. She's had many years' experience in leading innovation at the whole of institution level, including strategy, resourcing, curriculum integration, and product design and campus master planning. Kylie is a Principal Fellow of the Higher Education Academy and a 2020 recipient of an Equity Practitioners in Higher Education Australasia's Champion for Change citation. Please welcome Kylie and our panellists.
Probably everyone feels like they should have put in a shorter bio when it gets read out like that. Thank you very much, Ashlyn, and thanks for having the opportunity to amplify the voices of these students. I'd like to introduce them, and then we've had a bit of a conversation about how we might structure the time we have with you. So I'll quickly introduce each of them and then ask them some questions. And I hope that they'll have a conversation with each other that we can all learn from. So first of all, Will Burfoot is the President of the ANU Students Association, representing over 20,000 students and the elected undergraduate member on ANU Council. He's studying a Bachelor of Economics and originally hails from Perth, Western Australia. He's committed to strengthening student participation in university governance, seeing students as a key part of the solution to the governance crisis facing Australian universities. Welcome, Will. Next, I'm going to introduce Jennifer Lowe, the co-chair of Australia's Students with Disability Leadership Collective, which operates under the Student Voice Australasia Group. Jennifer is the co-chair of the National Students with Disabilities Leadership Collective and former 2024 president of the University of Newcastle Student Association. They've served on the University of Newcastle EDI Committee, Pride 2024 Working Group, and as co-chair of the National Students with Disabilities Leadership Collective, as I mentioned. They've represented Australia at the Humanitarian Affairs Third Global Peace Summit and United Nations Conference Centre, Bangkok, and has been part of the Girl Impact Program operating in Zambia to support education on teen pregnancy, STI and HIV prevention, and gender stereotypes. Jennifer has represented their university as a speaker at the 4th edition of Times Higher Ed Campus Live. As the 2024 president, they have been an active and practical contributor to the university ecosystem. They support policy and procedural analysis, which students can see in the university emphasis on individuals and disability and equity in general. Jennifer is an advocate for decolonisation and utilisation of universal design principles in university activities while developing more safe and practical ways students can engage in advocacy. Welcome, Jennifer. Next, Ricky Lee from the University of Queensland. Ricky is the National Vice President of the Council of Australian Postgrad Associations. He is the current board chair of the UQ Association of Postgraduate Students and has been serving as a member of the UQ Senate since 2020. As a UQ Global Change Scholar and pursuing a Doctor of Philosophy at the UQ School of Education, his research focuses on higher education governance and university partnerships. Ricky graduated from the University of Queensland with a bachelor's degree in Education and Arts and a Master of Education Studies in the field of leadership. He's also earned a master's degree in International Education at the University of Melbourne. As a teacher, Ricky has worked in an array of public and private schools in Brisbane, with experience in primary, secondary and international baccalaureate education. He's now a sessional academic and lecturer at UQ and has also previously worked in the federal and state public sector. Ricky's passionate about student participation and public education governance, and he's previously served as the president of the UQ Union. Welcome, Ricky, and thank you for being here. Right down the other end, Chad Buckham from UNSW. Thank you so much for joining us, Chad. Chad is a third-year mechanical engineering student at UNSW and a proud Gomeroi man from Cobar, New South Wales. He's represented UNSW in sport as captain of the Indigenous Nationals team, vice-captain of the mixed netball team, and as a New South Wales men's open reserve netball player. Chad draws on community, culture and support networks like Nurugili to navigate university life. He's also contributed to student life through roles in the UNSW Redback racing team as former president of Geelong College and currently as a resident advisor. Welcome, Chad. So you can see from the diversity of student experiences, backgrounds and roles that these students have played, we're in for a really great conversation over the next 40 minutes or so. So welcome to all of you. My first question to you, is, by way of introduction, is to ask each of you to give us a few thoughts on what drew you into the work you're currently doing in governance, why I think it's important. Will, do you want to start?
Happy to get started. So I'm a fifth-year student at the ANU. Apologies. And during my time at the university, I saw the amazing work that the ANU Students Association, or ANUSA as we refer to it, was doing. But I also saw that there was a growing gap between what students felt were the challenges they were experiencing and what the issues that the university were addressing. And in that growing gap, I think there's a real issue that students will start to feel disconnected and from their representative services, from their advocacy services, and from that will lead to students disengaging. And that's a real threat to student associations as representative bodies, but to universities at large. If students aren't feeling like their issues or their challenges are being focused on and addressed, then they're going to lose faith in the institution, which I'm sure we all know has been happening around Australia. And so in that gap, I saw a real big opportunity to be involved and to try and focus on those issues that I knew myself and the people around me really cared about. And we've had a lot of success in bringing those to the forefront and making sure that students do feel like they're being represented by their student association on campus.
Great, thank you. Who'd like to go next?
I'm happy to.
Thanks, Jennifer.
So my story is a little bit of accidental advocacy, like most of people I've engaged with students with disabilities. So I found a problem. I got very concerned about this problem, and it was stopping me from being able to engage authentically in the classroom. And I'm a fair bit stubborn, and so I attempted to fix the problem. That problem led me kind of all over the world in terms of engagement with students with neurodiversity, disabilities, and I saw I essentially just wanted to fix my own problem, but along the way I just kept hearing stories and more, and I just wanted students with disabilities to be able to bring their stories to the forefront, to say, yes, we are here at universities, we are not a statistic anomaly, and that our needs and concerns can be met.
Thank you. Ricky, would you like to go next?
Yeah, so for me, it's about personal experience and essentially contestation of a little bit of frustration towards the system. I think growing up as someone who's from a third culture, so somebody who's very simultaneously of Chinese descent and someone who's also Australian, I always had issues with trying to fit in, like somewhere, and trying to fit in is always the big problem. And when I first came to university, I realized that I'm actually not alone. You know, a lot of people are experiencing issues like that, and it may not be cultural. So I realized that, you know, the private school kids are sitting by as a group at university versus the public school kids. International and domestic students are sitting apart. People who are from, because I'm from Queensland, so people who are from the Gold Coast were sitting as a group, as opposed to people from Toowoomba sitting in a different group. But even like micro things, like I went to, for example, someone went to St. Leo's College on campus and someone went to King's College on campus. They sit separately. So why is that? I thought that the university is actually an opportunity for us to get together and learn from each other. But the university system at the time didn't offer anything like that. So I got involved with student unions, student associations, because I actually want to bring people together and I want to be able to exchange that the disagreement with grace, as Professor Matthews has said, and basically challenge the system a little bit. And that's how I got involved.
Great, thank you. Chad?
Yeah, I think mine was more of just a natural progression in trying to help as many people as I could. I felt that in an opportunity of the Indigenous Nationals team, I had a real chance to help and support people that I personally really enjoyed the company of. The same with the Residential Society. I felt that I was able to understand and include more people in our activities, and hence I thought that I would run for that position. And yeah, I think mine is from a place of just trying to support and encourage people, more so than anything.
Thank you. So again, you can see the diversity of reasons that people come to these representative roles, these roles where student voice is really apparent and really important. So Will, I'm going to come back to you. My question for you, and others feel free to join in. I agree with you, Ashlyn, the clock is really intimidating.
Yeah,
sorry about that. And good. Will, how should universities ensure equal voice for elected staff and student representatives on governing bodies while supporting their role in representing their respective communities? Sometimes a tension?
Unfortunately, yes. And I think that tension can be good. And I think that tension does have an important place. I think elected reps to council often can often feel like they're being stymied from representing their communities because of their obligation to work in the best interest of the university. The question of what is in the best interest of the university is one that is up for debate. But through my experience, I've seen that the communities that elect us to represent them on council and on equivalent boards often don't see anything coming back to them. They don't see any communication from their elected reps because of the obligations around confidentiality and speaking as a board and whatnot. And so that creates a real disconnect and a real divide within the community where people are being sent from their communities to share their voices and their perspectives, and yet their communities aren't hearing anything back from them. And so I think that's a really significant issue. I think large parts of my experience has been shaped by the challenges that ANU has faced this year. I've been on ANU Council while ANU's gone through its Renew ANU program, which has been a period of really significant distress for our community. And so we've seen the question of what is in the best interest of the university being one that's been hotly debated by many members of our community. And I think that's unfortunately led to a real divide between university management and executive and the staff and students who have really seen the direction that has been taken and don't see themselves represented in that vision for the university. So I think the tension that staff and student members on council face is a real one. I think it's important that they do feel that tension because obviously our role is to work in the best interest of the university. But we need to be able to have active debates and discussions and really honest discussions about those sorts of questions so that the students and staff communities are being, their opinions and views are being represented.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone want to add on to anything that Will said there? either about the tension or the need to be representative and share that feedback?
I think it's about like just respecting like everybody equally, right? And I think that, you know, perhaps we'll be addressing some of this in the latter questions, but if you are there as a Senate member, you should be respected as a Senate member, and your opinion counts. And I think that's probably the most important part.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what Kelly said earlier about students as people who know, who have knowledge, who have understanding and perspectives that are really important as part of that as well. Yeah. Jen, you talked before about being drawn into leadership and advocacy as a result of wanting to fix a problem. So how much do you think students feel empowered, and how much do they feel that their contribution matters?
So I can't speak for all students, but I can speak from my experience. So I definitely never came into this with grace and compassion. I was angry. I was like ready to attack people. Like, I think at some point I was told like 4 different times that you catch more flies with honey instead of like sugar or whatever it is. Okay, I messed that up. Anyway. Vinegar. Yeah, that one. I hate that saying. You say it to me, I'll get very angry. Anyway, so I didn't come into this space with grace and all that sort of stuff. I know, I went through a lot of, so I come from a background of like doing quite a few sexual assault and advocacy cases, disability cases. They're messy. No one's happy. Everyone's grumpy. It's normal. But, so I came into this space when I was elected as president, very, very grumpy, and I felt I had a right to be grumpy. I was someone who came from a low economic area. I was someone who had largely not had the most pleasant experiences in life, and I was grumpy. And I think it's good sometimes to acknowledge that student representatives are allowed to be grumpy. But I will say that as I came into this position, there was one person who met me where I stood. I was very grumpy, but he engaged with me authentically, and that was my Vice-Chancellor, Alex Galinsky. Now, I was very grumpy at him in particular. He didn't know this at the time, but we started actually engaging. Like, I was the first openly disabled president for my student association. And so we honestly started having conversation. We started working together, and he met me where I stood. He came to where I was and said, hey, let's work together. And for me at least, as a student who was very grumpy, I felt, okay, like, this is someone I can talk to, this is someone I can engage with, this is someone who wants to work and create something better. I started to believe in his dream, and for me at least, that is what empowerment is. That is what it means regardless of students with disabilities and all that sort of space. It's about connection and building relationships.
Great, thank you. And thank you for bringing that passion to the work, because I think that is a motivation that lots of people have, a need for change.
Yeah, and, we all kind of want the same thing at the end of the day, and it's sometimes really hard when you're in that state of grumpiness to actually reflect and say, hey, I want to take a step back. And, you know, it shouldn't always be on the advocate as well.
Yeah.
So I just want to bring those two.
Yeah, that's a really important point about the enabling features that can help advocacy take place if it's meant to be meaningful, which is what you've talked about. But Ricky, you're next on my list of questions, and it really flows on a lot from Jennifer's answer, because what I'd like to ask you is about the governance arrangements that you think are most effective in representing all stakeholders. How can student representatives be supported to gather input from fellow students that they are meant to represent, and how can that be meaningful? And maybe that loops a bit back around to what Will was saying before about how do you then share the outcome of that work with the people you represent?
I think the first principle is that we need to acknowledge that the student population is not a monolith.
Yeah.
Right? And to understand that each student, whilst we want to build a cohesive community of students, learners, in partnership with the university, students have different needs, different backgrounds, and that affects the way that they interact with their world. The best way to engage all the stakeholders is to have different types of representation. And I think that part of that representation is to understand that domestic students are inherently different to international students. We want them to get along, but they are different. Same with undergraduate and postgraduate students. Undergraduate students have a very different focus to somebody who might be a little bit more senior or older when they have already experienced life outside university and coming back. So one way to do that is probably engaging with the local student unions, student associations, and respect the fact that they have a pretty good idea of what's going on the ground, right? Right now, there's the student union election happening at the University of Queensland. Now, the campus has been turned into a battle zone. You would not recognize it. Like there are A-frames everywhere, and I mean like there are more A-frames there than an entire council election. So, like local council. So you can trust that the process is going to give you somebody who is actually quite like grounded by student opinions, because after all those thousands and thousands of students have voted through those contestation of ideas, that representative is probably a representative of the majority of the opinions on campus. So that's one way I'd say is the best way to get the stakeholders. But I think that recognizing that we need a diverse range of representation is important. So some universities have like Wheels University has one mega student organization. Other universities like Melbourne, UNSW to a large degree as well, Sydney, University of Queensland, we all have separate student organisations that represent like different demographics, and that might be a more contemporary way and design forward.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I just build
Yeah,
off
do,
Ricky's
please.
point really quickly? I think you make an excellent point that we do need diverse organisations representing a very diverse student cohort. But I think the thing that underpins all of that is that those organisations need to be empowered to actually do the work that students want them to do. And that means they need to have secure funding. It means they need to be independent from the university. And it means they need to be valued players in the discussions that happen at universities. And I know there's been lots of focus over the past 24 months or so with the universities accords and the introduction of minimum SAF for student organisations, which I think is a fantastic direction for us to be going down. But we need to see a real commitment from that at large within Australia to having independent, securely funded student organisations. I think that does go a really large way to ensuring that the diverse student cohort can be represented.
It's about providing both the means and the courage for them to be able to represent.
And so they feel supported as well. I think students' safety in those advocacy positions don't get talked about enough. Your mental health is on the line there. You get put into some situations which are out of control. And if you're not being fully supported in a safe environment, then that's also a factor.
I think the means and the courage to do it as well ties in nicely to the Lego analogy. Maybe it's not 2 tables of Lego, maybe it's the students hold the manual and the academics or the leaders have the bricks. They have the capacity to, or in many cases, do have the capacity or want to help in the best ways, but it's up to the courage of the students to provide them with the instructions or the pathways to best help them, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's I'm sure Kelly will be really happy that someone's picked up the analogy, but I think it's a really valuable one. I have another question that's not on the list, but what you've talked about's made me wonder, is it just one table, actually? And is a table even a relevant analogy for the work that we're doing? Because some people don't want to come to a table. They want to be heard in different ways. And how can we understand that diversity and diversity of voices and allow them to be heard in a way that shapes the future direction of the university? I completely don't have an answer for that, but I'm going to see if anyone has a perspective without notice, this question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
For me, it's about colours. Everyone brings different colours to the room. So I will come back to students with disabilities because we're not talked about enough. Sorry. But we bring the yellows. We bring the yellows. The students, international students, they bring the greens, or you can swap out any colour. Or students who have Indigenous perspectives and all these other different things. They're all colours that come together, and only together can you properly make a picture that's beautiful and that you can look at and be proud of. It'd be a bit strange if it was all black. Though I'm pretty sure the 4-year-old brother I have at home would happily do that.
Thank you. The other thing that you said, Vicky, about the number of A-frames and the contestation around student elections is making me lead to the question I'm going to ask Chad, because it actually takes a lot, and maybe a little bit about what you said, Jennifer, about safety, to put yourself forward, to say, I think I'd be a good person, as you've all done at different points in your lives, to represent a group. So, Chad, my question for you is, what are the ways that you've seen or you have gathered experiences in your life that have kind of prepared you for taking on a governance role or a representative role, a leadership role as a student? Can you give us a bit of insight into that?
Yeah, I wouldn't say I've been as courageous as some of the other few people here. A lot of mine has been very, like a natural progression, I would say. It just reminds me about when I did my first internship in mining, and as a part of being an engineer, you need to do your 60 days industrial training. And so I rock up to the mine site, and there's a mandatory 1 month of working with tradesmen. And at the time, you know, it's just like, oh, this is just free labour. They haven't sorted out my computer yet, or whatever. But it's such a critical part of being an engineer, is understanding the people that it affects. And through the work with the tradesmen, you know, you understand the risks, the safety, the difficulty, and try and make it more efficient for them and what they have to do. And I thought it was very interesting as an industrial practice, but also as something that can be brought into universities, always seen naturally. It's that I don't think you can ever forget what you're doing it for. I think that's the most important part. Being a member of a certain group and realising the impact that you can have, and then implementing those impacts once you're given that opportunity, I think that's the most important way to proceed. And that's how you get your experience, is being one of those people who are affected by putting yourself in their shoes, seeing the problem, and then you're proposing your solution. I think that's the best way.
Great, thank you. You're here. All right, Ashlyn, are we at time for questions? Is that the point that we're at? It says we've got 9 minutes left. Do you? Okay, I just want to do a quick time check and give ourselves a breather. I think we've heard some real insights here, both for what these individuals bring, but the kind of breadth of knowledge, experience, inputs, outputs that happen when we're really thinking about how we grapple appropriately with student governance and student leadership as well. So thank you all. Now we're going to go on a bit of an adventure of asking some more questions without notice. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, all our panellists. That was awesome. There's one question on the Slido that I really want to ask, because it's something I ask myself like all the time. Let me find it. Wait, it's on here. How do student reps build corporate memory when there's a new rep every year?
Yeah, great question.
So for me, it's about writing everything into policy, looking at how you can ingrain your already existing documents to add some explanation. Okay, why do we do this? Okay, well, tell a little story about how we got here, about how this problem occurred, and this is how we circumvented that. It's a really good document if it has that. Maybe it won't look as formal as everyone wants it, but it's a student document and it's my document, and I will put my little stories.
Thank you. Any other thoughts on that one?
I want to say that, I would kind of reverse the question and ask, how do universities or organisations assist new coming representatives every single year? Because I think that they are there to facilitate student representation. So I suppose the question here shouldn't be on the person coming in, but rather the people who are staying there, right? The people who are there every single year should be able to provide a scaffold, a manual for the new students to be able to walk into and represent their views. So I think that the framing of the question, I would probably turn it around if it was up to me.
So true. Do we have any questions from the floor? Yes.
Someone's coming.
Yeah.
Hi, my name's Zach. I'm an Aboriginal medical student in my 4th year, starting 5th year soon. I spent approximately 10 years of my life at universities, and from my 10 years, I kind of noticed that the conversation is really centred around student voice, what it looks like, yada, 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 rather than how do we keep the universities kept to account. So from my experience, for example, in our medical curriculum, with First Nations students do experience a lot of cultural safety incidents. I've been personally told that I didn't deserve a pathway into university because I wasn't the only, we aren't the only people who were colonised. So, and there are pathways to, voice our concerns and feedback, and it has happened. However, it kind of fell on deaf ears. Additionally, as well, for years and years, from Indigenous students, we had feedback about culturally insensitive examinations and content that was taught to the cohort at large. And it wasn't until that an external kind of organisation came in and listened to our own feedback that the university actually then implemented said changes of what we wanted to see. So my question is, how do we actually get the university to how do we hold them account rather than just pontificate?
So for me, at least, I see what you're saying, because I also did a first-year psychology class, and they would talk to me about my experience as an autistic individual while I sat in the class looking absolutely eyes boggled at some of the terminology they were using. And I was like, this is not okay. So I think it's about that ongoing dialogue. There are a multitude of other organisations external to the university for that accountability aspect, but there's also, I would recognise, finding champions within your university. There are staff who will back you. There are staff that will look and support you, but you just have to find them. Sometimes they're hiding in the closet, not that they're gay, but just that they're hiding in a closet for some reason.
Anyone else want to answer that? Any part of that? I think that idea about keeping universities to account is a really central part of advocacy. And if you think about that continuum that Kelly talked about as well, important part of that.
Awesome. This question comes from Belinda from Student Voice Australasia. What form of national support or resources would help embed a healthy, recognised and rewarded approach to student voice?
Go for it.
So I'm sure most of the people in this room, if you work at a university, you know that the National Code is coming to effect from the start of next year, and that's a really big change for universities. But I do think it is emblematic of the kind of direction that we need to take, which is that unfortunately, by and large, universities are not meeting the standards that the community expects of them. And so we need legislated minimum standards across the board, I think, for student and staff participation on councils, for secure funding for independent student organisations, for proper complaints mechanisms through the National Student Ombudsman, for example. I think those forms of legislated standards are really critical for, going back to the previous question, to holding universities to account, but also to ensuring that students can feel secure when they are, advocating on a particular issue that the university might not want to hear, that there are channels for them to go through, and they do have that kind of backing to raise those difficult questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's also resources available for professionals and staff members and students for how to work with students with partners. There's a bunch of amazing resources by ADCET. They work a lot they've got a bunch of resources of how to implement universal design principles into that kind of coursework and stuff like that. So just if there's staff members that are looking to engage themselves more in universal design principles and co-production, I also know UNSW does a lot with co-production, and they've written an amazing piece of work in regards to kind of that co-research area. So if you're looking for how to do that before the problem happens, there you are.
Any more? Yes?
Hi, my name's Stuart. I'm Director of Governance for Engineering, and so very interested in, I guess, bridging the staff and student gap somehow. We heard from Kelly about the this sort of pyramid or cone model, and I was kind of interested in the idea of partnership and participation, and how we can utilise staff members to cross that bridge, and I guess that also is that corporate memory kind of problem. So it looks like surveys are kind of, you keep students at a safe distance at arm's length, and you take their feedback and you can read it in your office on your own and be quite comfortable. And maybe student reps, the responsibility is too much on the student rep sitting in, you're supposed to go and get all the feedback from the entire student body and somehow come back and give that opinion after reading the notes from the different committee meetings. So, how can we maybe utilise staff to bring that participation and partnership upwards into, through the governance model and, partner better with students? Have you got any experience that you can share, or any ideas, any governance models that work? Thank you.
Yeah. I would definitely point towards the co-production kind of model. I've seen that work immensely well, where you bring in multiple different students and you work alongside them over a large time period to do ongoing work. So you can have students come in and out, but it's not all on that one student to, say, represent all of students with disabilities. And that way you can engage with them and it becomes a collaborative approach.
The clock has just run out. But were there any last comments from the panel?
Just quickly with that as well, I think that working closely with potentially academic tutors for particular courses. Personally, I interact a lot more with academic tutors through tutorial systems, or through the tutorial for each class, more than maybe the lecturer or the particular student representative. I think getting there, because I know each individual student obviously does my experience here at UNSW, but I think gauging based off the academic tutor would be a really useful bit of input.
Awesome, thank you. Luke, do you want to come up?
Can you join me, everybody, in thanking our fantastic student panel, Will, Jennifer, Nikki, Chad. Thank you. Good work.
Also, thank you to Kylie and, of course, Ashlyn, who's doing a wonderful job. I don't seem to have much to do, which is great. So, look, I do have the opportunity to tell you that there's a break now for about 20 minutes, and there's refreshments and coffee and tea and things at the back of the hall. And those of you online, enjoy getting a cuppa at home or whatever your afternoon delight might be. But we'll see you soon in 20 minutes. Thanks very much. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, great conversations happening in the hall, but we're very, very keen to keep this conversation going. So if kindly come back to your seats, kindly come back to your screens and rejoin us for this second half of the UA Student Governance Symposium. Folks, we normally do this at the end, but I really do want to acknowledge the incredible contribution from the staff and the team here at UNSW. So I want to give them, I'm going to start a round of applause on behalf of them. They're doing an amazing job, and thank you for your hospitality. Okay, so we've got some really, really great conversations to continue, and I really want to thank particularly our students in that last panel. I know we're hearing from more student voices, that's why we're here today, but I've been around this sector for longer than I can remember, but I always remember when we speak to students, and the perspective of students is different from when I was a student and even for students 5 years ago. So it's so important, and I really deeply appreciate that students have taken some time out of their busy schedules to come and talk to us. And I think it is really important. We'll be having a conversation as a sector after the Education Ministers meet at the end of this week to talk about governance. There's been some tremendous work done by the Expert Council on university governance. There's been work in the Parliament. There's work in the New South Wales Parliament continuing. That's important, and I hope those forums have been listening to students as much as we have today, because that's why we're here. As we get ready to come back to this session, I want to encourage you all to use the Slido app, which you're doing with great aplomb. We're going to get a few questions going to let you vote, because it's a democratic process, which is really important. So there are a few questions to get your creative juices flowing. And I think the slide is up there now at the moment. You can see that some of the responses clearly are being word mapped, and inclusive is now in the middle, which students was at the beginning. But I mean, I think that's emblematic of what we want to see, right? An inclusive governance model with students and others at the heart of those voices that we bring to the way we run our universities. So we're going to encourage you to continue. What is that word that best captures the change you'd hope to see? And what kind of governance council do you think is most effective? So we've got a quiz or a poll that is live on the slide. I would encourage you to have a vote if you haven't already. All right, so our next panel session will be facilitated by Sarah Bendel, who is the Commonwealth Ombudsman for students, and I'm very delighted to welcome her and her panellists, including Jessie Gardner-Russell, Wei Hong Liang, Michael Still, and Anya Chima. So a warm welcome to you all to the stage. I'll give you the opportunity to get on the stage while I give an overview of this next session. So this panel will explore what good practice in university looks like. Two important factors that drive good practice are institutional structures that include diverse perspectives and ensure they are heard, and a culture that is inclusive, supportive, and facilitates open dialogue. How is this achieved, and what are the hallmarks of a strong culture and effective structures that strengthen governance? As I've said, to explore this topic, we're delighted to be joined by Sarah Bendel as facilitator, who will give a more fulsome introduction of our panellists. For those of you who don't know, Sarah Bendel is First Assistant Ombudsman with the National Student Ombudsman, and she is an experienced lawyer and senior leader with a strong background in delivering large-scale dispute resolution. She's worked in roles responsible for complaints and investigations for 20 years across sectors ranging from law, health, child protection, public housing and human rights and domestic building. Sarah is passionate about empowering people to resolve conflict through effective dispute resolution and teaching organisations to use complaints as a way to improve their services, systems and culture. We're really, really delighted to have you not only as part of our sector's architecture now, Sarah, but of course with us here today and leading this conversation. So over to you.
Thank you, Luke, and hello, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be here today, and I can see from my photo that I'm very on brand. I have my same blue jacket, my favourite blue jacket. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands on which we meet and the lands on which those virtually are residing, and collectively pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to those attending today from First Nations communities. As Luke said, my name is Sarah Bendel. I'm the First Assistant Ombudsman with the National Student Ombudsman. I'm going to do a couple of minutes on the NSO just because I shamelessly want to tell you where the NSO is up to and ensure that one of the key messages you take away from this session is to raise awareness of the NSO. Shameless, I know. But to catch anyone up that isn't familiar with the National Student Ombudsman, we opened our doors on the 1st of February this year as Australia's new central place for students to raise complaints about their higher education providers. And they are complaints about any action taken by a higher education provider, except for a couple of carve-outs, and we're time poor, so if you want to know about them, just ask me later. We know that not every student feels comfortable complaining, and we know that by virtue of that, at the NSO, we need to ensure that we're maximising the individual voice through individual complaints to affect systems and sector-wide change. And that's what we try and do. So we focus on individual dispute resolution and recommendations for sector and provider change. Our tagline is empowering students and ensuring fairness. And I feel like that's pretty well aligned to probably everybody here and listening online as well. Since we opened our doors, we've heard from around 3,250 students about things that are going wrong with their university experience. And these are issues ranging from problems with learning adjustment plans, as Jen was referring to very diplomatically for Jen earlier, as well as issues with the application of special consideration, recognition of prior learning, issues with problems with accommodation or just a delay in refund of money owed, through to serious complaints about racial vilification, discrimination, or the way that providers have handled complaints about gender-based violence. So a really broad spectrum of things that are going wrong for students. And while these complaints may not be directly about governance, at their highest level, they are governance failings. And that's because they involve operating systems, processes, cultures, and ways of working that aren't as supportive of a high quality and safe student experience as they should be. So with this in mind, I find today's discussion really motivating because it's all about sharing ideas about how we can improve governance so that we can provide the best possible student experience for all 1.6 million students across the country. And governance helps us to achieve these improvements in the student experience through connecting our systems, processes, university structures, leadership and cultures together to drive a common purpose. but governance itself needs to be intentional and carefully considered. So that's what we're here to do. So this panel is focused on two important pillars for good governance: institutional structures and cultures. Our panel are going to do a deep dive into these two pillars. So institutional structures, the scaffolding for governance, the structures that support all voices to be heard, and culture, how we foster cultures that are inclusive, supportive, and open. We've got four diverse and very impressively experienced voices on the panel today to help inspire you through their ideas and insights. I'm going to introduce each of them briefly now, and as I said to them, I'm doing this in alphabetical order by surname. So Anya Chima is our first introduction. Anya is a third-year psychology student and a current chair of the Board of ARC at UNSW, Australia's largest student organisation. ARC is a not-for-profit with over 50,000 members and 250 staff, dedicated to enriching student life through clubs and societies, volunteering, sport, wellness and advocacy programs. The NSO could fit into ARC by numbers many times over. That's a big organisation. Anya previously served as Secretary of Philip Baxter College, one of UNSW's residential colleges, and currently sits on several university boards, including the UNSW Academic Board. Next, we're going to Jessie Gardner-Russell. Jessie is the National President of the Council of Australian Postgraduate Association and a PhD candidate at the University of Melbourne, Department of Surgery and Centre for Eye Research Australia. Prior to starting at his role at CAPA, which is the peak body for all 480,000 plus postgraduate students, Jessie served as President and Board Chair at the University of Melbourne Graduate Student Association, acting CEO and later as General Secretary. Jessie has the longest serving student member of the University of Melbourne Academic Board, so was the longest serving member of the Academic Board, and is also an advisory board member at Melbourne Uni Sport. Wei Hong Liang is our third very impressive panel representative. Wei Hong is the chair of the New South Wales International Student Representative Committee and a PhD candidate in sociology at the University of Sydney. He's a passionate advocate for international student rights and currently serves as the International Student Officer for the Council of Australian Postgraduate Association. Wei Hong has led major campaigns, including a statewide petition for public transport concessions, which is really important, and efforts to extend the age limit for the 485 visa for HDR graduates. He previously served as President of the Sydney University Postgraduate Representative Association and is now a Postgraduate Senate Fellow. And last but not least, we have Michael Still. Michael is the Chancellor for University of Wollongong. He is a respected business leader and brings a wealth of experience to the role of Chancellor, following a 30-year career leading public, private and not-for-profit organisations across a range of industries, including health, infrastructure and finance. Throughout his career, Michael has worked closely with universities to advance their research and commercialisation endeavours and has served on many high-level boards in the health sector. So, as you can see, very impressive, all four of them, and here to support you with insights into this deep dive about institutional structures and culture and how they can lead to good governance. I'm going to mix things up and sit down now, just to keep you awake and on your toes. And I'm going to throw our first question to Michael. Michael, it's a big question. What is the purpose of the university and what does it mean to govern a university in pursuit of this purpose?
That is a very big question. What is the purpose of a university? Some would say jobs and skills. Some would say something more than that, as I would. We are here to develop those people that are able to become the leaders and the thinkers at the highest level possible, so that we can create the environment where society and our communities can thrive, and I think especially, particularly for any lawyers in the room, we create the environment which protects our democracy.
That was an elevator pitch. I like it. So creating leaders and thinkers, I guess that's where it connects into student experience, which I think is a really central part of the university's purpose. Does anyone agree with that before we move to the second question? Do you want to talk about what, from your vantage point, what's the purpose of a university? Go for it, Jesse.
I actually couldn't agree more. One of the huge differences between universities and other educational institutions is the ability to learn from people who are at the cutting edge, at the forefront of their chosen field, people that have committed their life to driving that area forward, but then also who are then imparting that knowledge back onto the next generation. And in the case of a university, we have the absolute pleasure and to learn from these people, to be in an environment where we're given the tools to learn and where you are meant to be able to leverage these people, leverage these experts, leverage these leaders to gain that knowledge for yourself, but then take it further. And that's where the teaching and research part comes together. The universities are about providing the tools, teaching you and teaching how to think, teaching you new ways of thinking, but then we at a university, we then take it further by creating new knowledge to then give back to the community. And I think that ultimately that is if I had to synthesize a university down to its core piece, I think that for me is what separates universities from high schools and universities from technical colleges.
Good, okay, so now that we've nailed that, which actually is really important for governance, because you have to understand what you're driving, otherwise governance is just, it's random. So I am hearing a lot of messages in both of those comments about the importance of teaching and supporting students to learn, which is great. And I think that does connect into student representatives really well, because I guess students have different learning journeys, don't they? It's harder for some students than others in certain contexts and at certain times in their life. So being able to effectively represent students and hear that messaging, to know what to bubble up and into governance structures is a really important part of your jobs. So with that introduction, I'm going to throw one to Wei Hong in the first instance, but I reckon a few on the panel might want to say something about this. The question is, are the existing arrangements for student governance the most effective structure, or is there scope for improvement? And if so, how?
That's a good question. I probably answer the question from the international student perspective. That's why I'm here as a representative for international student. So international student probably will be seen as a two perspective. Firstly, they are an equity group. They need support. They have some specific and special challenge at the universities of the whole country, such as the visa and transport and New South Wales, housing matter, some special needs. That means they need special arrangement. We need more support and some program, multi-language support system to them. But in the meantime, the other perspective is long time being missed, that they actually already play a significant role as the whole population of the campus. For some universities, they have 30% of international students. For some of them, it's nearly half. But actually, the whole system in Australia is built on the input and evidence-based circle. If the student from overseas is not part of that circle, that means the whole evidence you get from the student voice or student system is not really meets the reality of our student. For example, when you make a survey and try to ask the student what's your feeling for your course, I'm sure when you design the survey, if your people are from a single background or your people from more than 100 countries, the methodology of your survey should be different. But my feeling is currently the same, the quite same. There's the whole system designed to hear student voice who are born here, get the high school knowledge at this country. Another case is about the outcome for your education. If we see, I'm not really agree the university designed to help people get a good job, but employability definitely there's some play an important role for your outcome. But we never have any good survey at this country to see what's the international student outcome on employability. When we talk about the university get 1/3 or at the top for the global employability, that data actually not including the international student cohort. So something like that. So I have some suggestion. One, that the university should hire for an international student advisory board or advisory body. I know some people ask me, do you suggest the Senate or the Council have a equity rep? I'm not support that. Probably no. They should have one independent for postgraduate, one independent for undergraduate. So how to fix international student voice here? We need a state level, university level international advisory board for get the student rep from different background, different cultural and national background, from different faculties and different course. Then we need the national level and state level have the independent representative body like what we are doing now. We have the state level New South Wales ISRC, and we just found the national ISRC to represent all student voice in the country. But we also need the support to help the students play their role well. And not just for stipend and some financial support, they also need training and the respect at their working space. Thank you.
Thank you, Wei Hong. Anyone else want to offer some views?
I wonder, would you just repeat the question?
I can do that. Yes. Are the existing arrangements for student governance the most effective structure? Or is there scope for improvement? And if so, what are those improvements?
Every university is different, of course. They all do things their own way. But what we do here is a regular theme of student representation not being sufficient. We're not being listened to, I understand. That then gets conflated with the governance of the organisation. And I think we need to separate representation from governance. When we have, just using Wollongong, we have elected members of council. They are not representatives of anybody. They come to council for their own skills, in their own way, for the benefit of the organisation as a whole. They don't represent a particular point of view. They get very surprised when I talk to them before they join their first council meeting. They think they're there to press a particular agenda. They get surprised when they're told they're not. But what we can do is create an environment where they feel very safe and encouraged to bring those agendas to a different forum, whether that be through management or through participation in a council forum, which is not council proper. So we have many occasions where students can voice the difficulties they experience. That gives council members, mainly me, an opportunity to help them chunk up their thinking to what governance really is, because systemic thinking is what they're there for, not individual prosecutions. They like that because they're there because they're good thinkers and they want to think better. Elevating thinking to systemic thinking, then to structural thinking, is a cultural issue which we try and create, generate, foster through all of the student bodies.
I think Michael's in camp. It's pretty good the way that it is. Would that be right, Michael?
Second, sorry.
So the governance structures that we have for students is working quite well.
I think it's working well. The structure's okay, but culturally, does it work? I think is the question.
Okay.
And culture is, of course, what we do and how we do it. And with respect to students, how do we bring students into the fold, encouraging them to think in a way that's structural and systemic so that they can be really valuable to governance?
Okay, I like this. This is a combining of our two pillars that we're focusing on. Anya, what do you think about those two things? That the structure, maybe it's largely okay. I'm sure you can think of some improvements, knowing you, but that actually the culture that you create and support students with is the most important thing to focus on.
I think I totally agree with that point. I think the structures, I think we see so often that people try and kind of focus on the structures and try and pick apart the structures. But if you ask me, I honestly could not tell you like maybe any big issues in the structures. I do think the culture is where we see the issues. I think one thing that's really interesting is for me is sometimes I'm walking into rooms where I'm expected to know the view of like all 70,000 students in this city, and I'm like, I couldn't even tell you the view of 5 on some issues. Yeah. So it's sometimes a bit hard. And one thing that I find really interesting is we hear so much the importance of student perspective, and I obviously think that's so important, not just as a fellow student, but also as someone who's in the room where those decisions are being made on policies and strategies. It is so important to have student representatives, but it's also just important to ask students. And I think a big point is student consultations. And I know how tough it can be when there's dozens of people reviewing papers, but student consultations are so important. And very often we find them kind of being put at the end as like a last resort, or wait, we forgot to ask students, other than the ones in the room, let's do a student consultation. But that is something that needs to be done early and not just once. It needs to be done throughout numerous stages, because otherwise we can find ourselves overlooking the students on the ground. Because obviously I'm a student, but my perspectives are very different because I am involved in these rooms. I'm involved in this high-level conversations. It's very different, and probably I don't have the same perspective as a first-year student who's been here for a couple months. And honestly, those perspectives are more important than me. I lived this uni in 1 year. Like most of the time, we all know how slow unis move. These policies won't even be enacted in the times I'm here. It's those people who are more important. And of course, representatives are really important, and student reps are really important. But they only do their job well when they are making sure that they are properly representing the views of students. So I think that's on students to go out and to make sure you are representing, but sometimes it can very easily become, yeah, I'm representing the student view, but actually it might actually just be your view and like the 5 people you talk to daily. So I think that is a big thing. And I think that is the student culture. When you're a student rep, you have to make sure you have that culture of going back to the ground and making sure you're updating your views and that you're properly representing those students. And also it's a big thing on staff to make sure that those students are being involved in the conversation. So I totally agree.
I have a comment here that because I from other country come to these countries and culture, my feeling for one significant matter for the culture is the university really worried about they walk or touch student space, then we blame they touch student space. So they take a position that we keep distance with student union, we not involve you, we just see you as a brilliant rep if you come to my meeting, but I never really want to do a deeply involved to help the unions do efficiency representative work. That's for a long time, that's not good. University should involve, but in a way, it not means the executive involved, but at least the university governance body should involve and to truly help the student rep and student organization running well. The running well means they follow the order and legitimacy, but in the meantime, they should play a real representative role at the campus. That's something for the culture here really special.
So in broad terms, a culture of listening and respecting all student voices, feeding into cultural, to governance structures at different points, but at the point of council, for example, in a way that de-stresses the experience for student representatives on council, so that there are times where all council has to take responsibility for ensuring that they're informed on full student voice, including international students.
Remember though, the council or senate is not the party room, it's cabinet. It's where structural, elevated, strategic decisions are made, not where management decisions are made. So often when student elected members start at a council, they think that they're bringing a student perspective, but it's an individual perspective or that sort of brought about by discussion in their own groups. They are management issues. But some of the bigger issues are really worth exploring. Students recently at another university got so sick of being in groups of students for study purposes where nobody spoke English, that as a structural issue, they went to the Chancellor and said, this process has failed. So it's a structural issue which defeats the strategy of the university that they went with, rather than, I don't like what's going on here.
That sounds like a conversation we could have for the rest of the panel. Yes. But I think we've learnt from that one that, you know, it's complex. Understanding how culture impacts governance structures is really complex and in part unique to different universities, but in part consistent too. I think we've heard consistently through this afternoon that prioritising and respecting student voices is important throughout governance structures. I'm keeping a close eye on the clock, and we've got about 9 minutes of our panel left, so I'm going to maximise them, and we are going to move on to another question. And Jessie, you haven't chatted for a while, so you're going to kick us off for this one. It's like a government interview, this one. It's almost like a double barrel. If you've ever gone for a job with government, you know that they love long questions, just to keep you on your toes. So here we go. It is a double barrel. Students often only serve on a governing body for 1 year, which can limit continuity and long-term influence. How does this affect student governance? And how can this be improved to strengthen the student voice? And we did go some way to starting this conversation in the last panel, but I feel like we've got a longer journey ahead of us. So Jessie, over to you.
Thank you. So depending on what student organisation or what kind of student representative structures are present at your university, there are a range of different term lengths that people might be a student representative for. Generally, most student representative bodies have a term of about 1 year. And what we have heard when we talk to our members across the country is that, and also in my experience when I was a local, campus student representative, was that it takes 3, 4, 5, 6 months to understand such a complex organisation. Within the Chancellery, there are many different departments or many different wings of the Chancellery. There are these days multiple Deputy Vice-Chancellors who have a range of different portfolios. There are a range of Pro-Vice-Chancellors who have sub-portfolios. Then there's a range of different project officers that all are playing a different part. And as well, some universities have a provost. I had to learn what that was. And for a lot of student reps, this can be very challenging to learn the lay of the land, and it takes quite a long time to build a relationship with a lot of these people to understand who does what, and as well, when you're advocating for students, who has the power to change things for the interests of the students. And of course, those who've been reading the news would also know that there's been lots of restructures at universities. Nothing is worse as a student representative than when the uni management gets restructured, because suddenly you now have to go relearn the entire lay of the land and who's who does what, and who to go to for a simple thing such as getting the window fixed in your student org building can change dramatically based on the recent restructure. So this goes to my second piece, which is that obviously having more time as a student representative allows you to use that runway period to learn how things work or learn what the university is like, and then how to influence change in the future. And having, at our organisation at GSA, at UniMel, we extended our term limits as student representatives for our executive from 1 year to 2 years, noting that we had, over a sustained period of time, poor internal governance. So that is, the changeover on representatives led to a lack of understanding of, for example, EBA negotiation. So I've done 2 EBA negotiations with our staff at GSA, and that's a skill you have to learn. And if you don't have that sustained period of time, suddenly the next team has to go relearn it again. And that can lead to some student representatives maybe suboptimally negotiating EVAs, which then creates long-term costs, which, you know, I understand sometimes when some parts of the university talk about the cost of labour, and I can, having seen some of our EVAs over the years, I get it. But as well, the other aspect is that that longer period of time enables you to finish off projects. Over the years, I worked with, when I was GSA president, I worked with 5 student union presidents, 7 student union general secretaries, and 6 international student presidents. And I was just there the entire time. And oftentimes you see projects start, stop, and lots of piecemeal advocacy projects that never get finished, or they get rehashed every year. And so I genuinely do think that there are great benefits to having student representatives that have longer terms. Now, this is where the structural piece at universities comes into play. At some universities, they have a body that is more or less in terms of the governing documents governed by the university. It's very hard for a student rep or for student reps to change those rules about how long their terms are. That's up to the university. But for independent student organisations, we have the power to change it ourselves. The members have the power to help us change our own rules to give ourselves more time to deliver for them. And in that case, we actually do have the power to change it ourselves. And I genuinely believe that at GSA and our other organisations that have taken that approach, it does lead to that long-term systemic thinking, that long-term thinking of you're no longer there for the 1 year just trying to hammer out, you know, all the meetings you can. Instead, you've got a bit more time to sit back and think about what the organisation should be looking like in 2, 3, 4 years' time. You have a bit of time to develop a strategic plan. You have some time to restructure the organisation yourself for those who are brave. And I think that it then enables you as a student rep, when you're working with the university, to also bring that kind of thinking to the university in terms of your advocacy and how things fit together, because you actually have a bit of breathing space. And I think that that the more local thinking that we were talking about comes from the fact that we have such short periods of time as student representatives that you don't really have time to start thinking about what the university is going to look like in 10 years' time, because you're thinking about, well, these students came to me during the election or during my first couple of weeks with these key issues, and I've only got this many months to get that fixed for them before inevitably I'm out of office and someone else has to pick up my work, and historically not many people continue on that work.
And I'll probably add some comment here. I suggest the university should give up the idea that they rely on 1 or 2 student leader, because they only have 1 or 2 or more years, but they still rely on 1 or 2 superstar. If you have a couple of student leaders in a group, let's say 30 to 40 student leaders as a group, as student rep council or something like that, you're not really worried about 1 year or 2 years, because people never live together. So some of them will be here, and then you have new people. But the group of forever young always be here. So that's why people ask that question is because they only rely on the president, rely on we to contact us, but they not really know any other student rep. Those people ask that question.
Yeah, it's a really practical suggestion and some great advice from Jessie for everyone too. Okay, so I'm gonna borrow 1 minute, because this last question and the challenge for everyone is you've got to answer it in one word. I'm sorry, I have failed as facilitator, but it's a really good question. So as best you can, one word. What do you believe, and it's a bit negative, but I feel if we focus on a problem, then in time we can find a solution. What do you believe are the main points of tension or challenge within current student governance structures? One word. Anya, we'll go down.
Oh God. Current tension. Okay. Wait, can I skip? Sorry, I'll come back.
Anya passes.
I've gone blank right now.
Wei Hong.
Trust.
Trust. Yeah, I like it. We're building our own word cloud.
The trust for university, but in the meantime, the trust for students for their union is also needs to be increased.
Trust.
Yeah, trust.
Jessie?
Why'd you have to steal mine?
It's like ordering in a restaurant.
We're close, we know each other.
We must continue down this way and circle back.
Oh, I've got my word. I'll jump in if
Anya to the
you're still
rescue.
Thinking. Reality. I think that sometimes in a room full of university, higher education staff, sometimes I feel like we live in different worlds. The importance of student governance and tension, I feel sometimes, is we really need to show that actual reality of this university life, and sometimes it can be really hard to voice that.
I like it. Jessie, there's no escaping.
Maybe.
Unless Michael to the rescue.
I have one.
Okay.
Representativeness.
Yep.
I think
that is a word.
It does speak to the tension that Michael brought up, which I have also heard a lot of council members talk about, that are student council members, which is what defines being a student member on council and what is representative.
It's a good one. You pass. Michael.
I think the essential element might be a lack of genuine interest.
Controversial. I feel that's a controversial one. I encourage that.
Yeah, so life is fraught. People have serious jobs to do. Too often, students' views are treated certainly not disdainfully, but without enough interest, respect, understanding, so that they can be collected, understood, recouched and formed in a way that makes sense in governance. And we can't blame them for not doing that of their own accord. It's our job to help them do that and elevate them to understand the process of thinking better, where afterwards they will become very valuable people to their groups themselves and indeed to the institution. Students far too often are treated by all parts of universities, and my own included, oh, those students, God, here they go again. That I think is very sad.
I agree. I'm sure everyone here agrees with that. That's another call to arms, I feel. Okay, that was not 1 minute, but I'm going to stop talking. The panel are amazing. I'm sure we will thank them in a second, but we're moving to Ashlyn helping us with Slido. Is that right?
So I don't think we actually have any. Oh, no, never mind. We've got some now. This is good. Okay, the first question is, would it benefit if governance structures were to be standardised across all universities?
I personally do not think that it would work. just because every uni is very different. The culture is different, the trends in the unis are different. What is important to one uni might not be to another. So I don't think it would work. I think what would work is having a standardised culture. I'm stealing Michael's point. Culture, not governance structure. I think having that culture of respect is what is important. And for example, like how Jessie was saying that in Uni Meld GSA they changed it to 2 years. I don't know if I personally believe that would work in UNSW, but what I have found works really well in UNSW is that we have 1 year terms, but some leadership roles come in at a different time in the year. So I came into this role in June, but other academic board members or faculty board members, they come in at the end of the year, December. And I find what is really nice is that we offset each other. So we can continue those problems, but also we can have that support of someone who's been in for half a year already. So I don't think that it would be a benefit to have it standardised.
To answer the question, the coalition tried to do that in the early 2000s. And it didn't work.
So true. Were there any audience questions?
Yep, Ryan Naylor from the University of Sydney. So obviously today we've been talking a lot about values and the way the student voice is valued within our organisations. My observation of the questions as kind of the underlying theme that we've seen is that people are asking for structural solutions to problems where those values have failed, or where the champion is not in place, where something is going wrong with that side of things. So structural solutions to cultural questions. I also think it's important to note that everyone here obviously is on the same thing, but universities are complex organisations and there are competing values, and to some extent it doesn't matter if something is our third most important value, because the first two will take up all of the oxygen in the room a lot of the times. So I'd like to ask you all, what are the cultural solutions to these cultural problems, if there are ones? How do we make these changes, given that we've been talking about these issues for 20 to 50 years, to get to the place that we are now, which is still clearly quite imperfect?
I'll give it a go. Culture's the hardest thing possible. Structure is easy. We learn in MBA school that structure follows strategy, implementation follows structure. Life is easy and solved. That does nothing for generating culture. What happens with students who are smart, ambitious, wanting to make sure they eke every last drop out of their experience at university, they come with their best understanding of what is needed for them and for their fellow students. How culture creates an environment where that is understood, respected, brought to a framework which can bring about necessary change or explain why change might not be the best thing, is what's missing, because it's time consuming and it's hard. So if you wanted to put it in one word, time is what's needed.
I've got one. Leadership. I think that if you want a catalyst for culture change, it needs strong leadership. You need leadership to recognise that there's a problem and to drive the coming together of lots of great minds to find a solution to that. That's how it can begin.
Yeah.
And a change for the economics foundation. The culture today is because we have a dilemma that we claim universities for public goods, but actually we rely on half of the population pay their tuition fee to fund the university. You cannot claim a single thing for public, but they earn money. So probably if we want to have a better culture, we need to reset the financial support for the whole university system back to the public.
Awesome. I like this one. Based on shared sentiments from the panel, how do they suggest we encourage university staff to respect, trust and value student representatives' input?
Easy. KPIs. It is an essential part of their role and they have to be measured against it.
I think at the end of the day, university staff, I think in my experience, I've had a really positive experience that they love student input and, you know, they really do value what I have to say. However, I feel as though sometimes it can be easy when this is your job to try and improve, and what ends up happening is you end up focusing on all the issues in the university and all the problems we need to fix. At the end of the day, it's a great university. We all go to great universities. We all work at great universities and some of the best in the world. And I think the best way is to trust like it says, is to trust in your student representatives' input and to make sure and to value kind of the work that you're doing and to trust that you are doing the right work and that to trust that, you know, you are improving things. And I think unless sometimes you take a step back and focus on the positives and focus on the change you have created in the university, you are just going to constantly focus on what is wrong with the university and focus on the 90 things that are good in the university. I don't know if I really answered that question now that I look at it, but I think that was an important point regardless.
I'm going to hijack this question to say that when you see that there are issues that arise here, the National Student Ombudsman is a place you can go. nso.gov.au is my answer to that question.
So when it comes to giving input, I think it's really important we think about what that means. I mean, as a student representative, I spent years in some meetings where there are some people who are there to hear what you have to say and actually action it. And then there are those who write it down and there's no accountability as to where it goes. The most valuable thing and the most rewarding part of my student representative experience was when, after years of talking and listening and trying to advocate on some of the issues in our research training policy regarding, there were some structural issues in the policy, but as well it was leading to processes that really negatively impacted student outcomes. The most rewarding thing was when the president of academic board said, okay, we'll come write the new policy with us. And I was in the working group with a whole bunch of other academics, and we would, every week, we'd sit on Zoom and we all had a part of the policy that we were writing each, and we'd sit down, and I wasn't treated as a other. I was in the shared Word document writing the new policy. Good. And I got to talk to everyone, and we would debate what the policy should look like and what the finer details were. It wasn't treated as you're just here to give some high level words. I was there to help them write and shape the wording, come up with the values, come up with the principles, and then change the finer points. And unfortunately, there was a particular person I was trying to help with this particular, just a particular person that the issue they were facing was quite common, but I really wished that policy had been passed, the new version of the policy had been passed in time to help her with the issue, and it wasn't. But I was at least proud to be able to say that after that policy change, that no one else would ever face that problem again, because it's completely changed. That issue is non-existent anymore, and no longer would students face that issue where they're going to the graduate research management teams at in their schools and being told, well, this is what the policy is, this is what the policy says. It no longer said that, and so they could operate in the way that was fair, and that all of the academics on this working group all agreed that the policy was ridiculous in this sense. And I think that when it comes to input, to encourage staff to respect, trust and value us, sometimes it means letting us into the tent, and we're equal contributors. I can write quite well, allegedly. I hope my thesis is pretty good. we can write. We can think about policies. I write policies for GSA. I know how these things work. Interesting.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. The clock has run out. So thank you to all our panellists. That was awesome. Thank you.
It's just our double act to say thank you very much again. And can I thank my much more competent and much more used co-MC, Ashlyn Horton, in her day job as the National Union of Students President. So I'm deeply grateful for your work today, and thank you for joining me on stage. Thank you again to all of our panellists and the questions posed. I think Ashlyn and I are standing between you and drinks, but do we have some final things from Slido I think we need to present? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Over to you.
I believe we do have 2 final Slido polls. It's just feedback survey. Yippee. And there is a fun question. What are your next steps for advancing student governance based on the insights from the symposium? So yeah, cool. Well, while you answer those, I will just reiterate thank you to everyone who participated today. It was really awesome to see so many people here, and I know there's a lot more online. Thank you to all of our speakers and panellists for your insights, and thank you to the UNSW team for hosting us, especially to Sarah and Isabel and the rest of your team, and also to the amazing Natalie from UA. You have been awesome. But that is it. So it is time if you want to stick around to have a drink. So yeah, thank you everyone. I think they're being served over there.
Thanks.
Oh, that's yours.